This text is about a kind of closure that does not happen while something is ending, but long after it has already ended. There is a moment, sometimes months, sometimes years later, when we begin to understand what we could not see while we were inside it. Not because the past has changed, but because we have. Most endings do not give us the conversation we imagined or the explanation we hoped for. Closure arrives differently through distance, reflection, and the gradual acceptance that some things will remain unfinished. This letter you are about to hear was never sent, not because it could not have been, but because it no longer needed to be. Listen to it not as a message meant to reach someone else, but as a way of completing something within oneself. I am writing this knowing that the letter will never reach you. Perhaps that is why I can finally say what remained unsaid for so long. There is a strange kind of honesty that happens when there is no longer any possibility of response. No need to defend, explain, or justify. Only the quiet acknowledgement of what was and what was not. I often wonder when exactly we began to drift apart. There was no single moment, no argument strong enough to mark an ending, only a gradual thinning of something that once felt solid. At the time, I told myself that this was normal, that all relationships settle into a quieter form, that intensity cannot last forever, and perhaps that was true. But what I did not see, or did not want to see, was that the quiet had turned into distance. And the distance into a kind of absence that neither of us knew how to name. We were still speaking, still sharing the same spaces, still performing the gestures of closeness, and yet something essential had already withdrawn. I think now that love does not always end through conflict. Sometimes it ends through inattention. Through the small decisions not to speak, not to ask, not to reach out, when something in the other person has clearly shifted. There were moments when I sensed your loneliness, even while we were together. I recognized it because I felt it too. But instead of moving toward it, I retreated into myself. As if silence could protect what was already fragile. There is a kind of tenderness in admitting failure without turning it into blame. No one was wrong. No one betrayed the other. Now I see that endings have their own dignity. They do not always need to be resisted. Sometimes they ask only to be recognized. I do not know where your life has taken you since then. I carry the memory of us without resentment. Not as a wound, but as a quiet reminder that love, even when it does not last, leaves a mark that is not entirely painful. There are evenings when I think of you not as you were at the end, but as you were when everything still felt possible. Not because I want to return there, but because it reminds me that something real did exist. This letter is not a request for forgiveness nor an attempt to reopen anything that has already been closed. It is simply an acknowledgement that once, for a time, we shared something fragile and human, that it mattered. Some things do not need to be resolved to be completed. They only need to be understood. Wherever you are, I hope you have found a way to feel at home in your own life. And if there are moments when you remember me, I hope they arrive gently, without regret, without the weight of what might have been. That would be enough. What stays with me in this letter is not the regret, but the quiet shift that happens afterwards. For a long time, we may continue wanting something from the other person, an explanation, an apology, a different version of how things unfolded. We imagine that if they could only see what we see now, something inside us would finally settle. But there comes a moment when that need begins to loosen. Not because the past has been repaired, but because we no longer require it to be. Closure, then, is not something granted from the outside. It is something we arrive at when we no longer need the story to unfold the way we want it to. It comes from accepting a different path. There is a quiet freedom in that, in realizing that the resolution we were seeking for was never entirely in someone else's hands. Sometimes, the most compassionate thing we can do is release the expectation that another person must become different for us to move forward. And in that release, something else appears. Not indifference, not forgetting, but a calmer understanding that allows life to continue without carrying the past as a question, but more like a chapter from a book that we once read.